Hello and welcome. In this video we're going to be looking at understanding text, context and medium. And we're going to be going through basically all the things you need to know about a text, its surrounding context, so everything that surrounds a text, and all the things that are influential in the construction and also the meaning of a text. And also basic notes on medium as well, so a text's medium and what effect it has on meaning as well. So first of all, text and context is basically the relationship between a text and the world around it. So basically what that means is it's sort of looking at a text in relation to everything that goes into making it, not only that, but also sort of cultural assumptions, social assumptions, and the way that different people from different periods of time, from different cultures, and different ways of life look at a text through analysing it and interpreting it. In other words, it's basically how a text fits into those things, how it fits in the culture, how its ideas relate to both the time of its writing, so the historical context of when it was written. So even the text written yesterday will still have historical context as far as yesterday, and a contemporary reading, so one that we get now. What has changed between basically the time the text was written and now? What is important? What meaning do we get that changes? And particularly you'll notice that if you do Shakespeare, for instance, where there's about a 400-year gap between the time when it was written and modern society when we're interpreting it. And particularly a lot of things that we use to use Shakespeare to interpret, for instance, are things which Shakespeare wouldn't have even considered or contemplated in his time. So it's one of those things that having context is important for shaping future meaning, and of course different meanings that come from a text, and even things which become relevant and things which change out of time where they're almost completely forgotten. Now medium, on the other hand, also affects how a story is constructed, basically through the fact that different mediums are presented in different ways, and we're going to look at that as well. But first of all, let's look at context and what it is. So studying context involves analysing and really just going into depth about really looking at how a text fits into the world around it. Now, no text can be fully understood when isolated from the world, which means that yes, you can get a fair understanding, and of course it's actually quite good to read text in isolation first, not only with you reading it independently, but also not really looking at it in terms of the world it was written around, so it doesn't really influence your opinion straight away. Read it, understand it, get your own understanding, and then go off and do research about the time it was written, who the author was, what sort of movement they were part of, if they were part of a movement, what their political views were, whether they had a family, what the time was like, were they rich, were they poor, were they famous. All those things are important to really fully understanding what the meaning of a text is. And particularly when you are sort of putting your response together, if a question asks you a bit about its context and really understanding it, then that is quite important and does shape meaning, and particularly the reason why certain components of the text are the way that they are. So having a look at context really does help to sort of add that final piece to the overall puzzle of how it's all put together. Now, a text also can't be consistently and universally. And what I mean by that is that it does change over time. And particularly a text which is seen as good or socially accurate at a particular time may not be so in the future. So if you read a lot of stories, for instance, like Brave New World or George Orwell's 1984, then what you'll find is yes, there are differences between what is emphasized as happening in these particular time periods at that time and what actually does happen. So that's something that's not consistent with the time of them being written. Of course, they're trying to predict the future, so that's always quite difficult. And universally, so my interpretation of a text living in Australia will be different from someone who's looking at a text coming from an American society or a South American society or an Asian society or an African society or any society for that matter. Even societies within our own country will look at things differently depending on whether they're rich or poor, what their religious beliefs are, what their upbringing is, all those things. So things are interpreted basically on the basis of a person and their own beliefs. However, there can be some things which overlap, which sort of form part of the universal consensus, but of course it's not exact. So that's basically what context is. Now let's look at the next bit, which is the text and context in the Border Studies syllabus. Now this requires you to analyze what informs a reading, so basically how you read it, what meaning you get out of it, as well as the different ways interpretation can be made. So not only the things that shape your understanding, but how you then understand it yourself. So what parts of the text shape your understanding, and then how do you interpret those things? So those are the two things that the Border Studies and the outcomes require you to basically do when you're looking at text and context.